Hello, and welcome to the movie universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Not too long ago, I did my what if scenario of Godzilla versus Serpentera. And after I was finished, it occurred to me I missed one element, and that would be Burning Godzilla. But because Burning Godzilla has such special abilities and all that, and plus, in a way, he's got two versions, I figured that this was too big to be shoehorned into that. So I decided to make it its own video. So today, we're going to ask the question, what if Burning Godzilla versus Serpentera? Now, as we all know, there are two versions of Burning Godzilla, the Heisei version and the recent Legendary Studios version. And because of that, I'll have to split it up. First, we're going to cover the Heisei version, and then we'll cover the Legendary version. Now, everybody knows the Heisei version because this one is legendary for all the right reasons. But of course, I can't talk about this version without explaining how he became Burning Godzilla. To put it simply, he was having a nuclear meltdown where his radiation was getting super hot and super unstable. So obviously, he was dying and he was going to take everything with him in a huge atomic blast. But not before releasing tons of atomic energy and, of course, fighting Destroya. And in the end, the nuclear meltdown that Godzilla is feeling does destroy him. And that's the basic outline of the story. It's very simple and very deadly, especially to Godzilla himself. Now, of course, I have to compare the sizes to Heisei's Burning Godzilla and Serpentera. It may seem irrelevant here because I talked about it before, but the Heisei version was a little bit taller. In fact, the Heisei version of Godzilla stands 262 feet tall. Well, for Serpentera, because he has two forms, I have to give you two different measurements. In his dragon mode, he's actually 1,640 feet long. And when he's in his warrior mode, he actually stands 1,131 feet tall. Now that we covered the size differences, let's talk about power. And this is where things are definitely going to get interesting. Because with Burning Godzilla, he has so much power built up because of his nuclear meltdown that he's turning water into steam. And even more so, he's gained abilities that he originally never had, such as his burning heat ray. Now, basically, it's his atomic breath, but it's become even more powerful. In fact, it almost looks like fire. And there's been some people that say that every time he fires this, it actually gets even more powerful. And there actually is proof of that because it does not stop with the burning heat ray, because eventually it evolves into what's called the infinite heat ray, which is basically the burning heat ray with some kind of an electrical spiral zooming around it. And whatever it hits hard. In fact, it was powerful enough to hurt Destroya greatly. And once again, the more times he uses it, the more powerful he gets. He also can generate a nuclear pulse, but it seems to be limited as to direction and how to do it. And what's even more interesting, the radiation given off by Burning Godzilla seems to give him the ability to heal even faster than he did before. In fact, there's one scene where Destroya is cutting him to ribbons with that horn of his, and he heals very quickly, in fact, almost instantaneously. Now, Serpentera, on the other hand, has incredible lightning attacks, and he also has another weapon that was used only one time in the series. It's been called the Black Hole Blast, for the obvious reasons, because, well, what happens is he gets a charge of energy built up, he shoots it into the ground, and it literally creates a black hole that destroys an entire planet. Like I said before, Serpentera is incredibly powerful, but with such power comes weaknesses, and he's got some pretty big ones. First and foremost, his great size makes him pretty sluggish, obviously, as you would imagine, being as big as Serpentera is. He probably moves very slow, and it's no secret among Power Ranger fans that Serpentera's biggest weakness is its power. In fact, Serpentera uses so much power that it just drains it immediately. In fact, this comes up time and time again in the series. So now the big question. Burning Godzilla versus Serpentera. Who would win? I could see this going really one way. Serpentera would use his lightning attacks on Godzilla, and it would probably hurt him pretty bad, but it wouldn't stop him because he would heal very fast. Burning Godzilla, on the other hand, would start emitting nuclear pulses, and of course, he would be using his burning heat ray, which would quickly supercharge and become the infinite heat ray, which would really do some serious damage to Serpentera. In fact, probably more than enough to destroy him. And if Burning Godzilla didn't destroy Serpentera right there with his infinite heat ray, Lord Zed would realize that he would have to flee as fast as possible, so he would probably take Serpentera and run. That is, if Burning Godzilla doesn't get him first. And after Serpentera flees, Burning Godzilla has his nuclear meltdown and dies. That's the only way I could see it. Either way, Godzilla dies in the end because of his nuclear meltdown. Now that we talked about the Heisei version, let's talk about the legendary version. This one actually goes by another name in some circles. Because of what he was able to do, he has been called Nuclear Godzilla, and rightfully so. Believe me. Now, we all know how he gets this power because this movie wasn't very long ago, so there's really no point in saying it, but I feel that I must. Now, before we get into his abilities, I must talk about his height. In the Legendary Pictures version, he is 396 feet tall. It happens when Mothra sacrifices herself and gives her power to Godzilla. After about a few minutes, Godzilla absorbs her power, and he becomes Nuclear Godzilla. And boy, is he powerful. Because when he is walking through the city, all the buildings are literally melting around him within seconds. Now, unlike Burning Godzilla from the Heisei version, Nuclear Godzilla doesn't seem to give off a atomic breath or a burning atomic breath or anything like that. Instead, he just gives off pulses, and very powerful ones too. So powerful that he was able to burn off Ghidorah's wings and 2 of his heads. And even more so, he seems to have an incredible healing factor. In fact, it seems to be more like armor, actually, because when Ghidorah zaps him with his electric attacks, it doesn't even phase him. So that gives him a 1-up on this. Because for the Burning Godzilla from the Heisei version, he just seems to heal fast. Whereas for Nuclear Godzilla from the Legendary version, he seems to be pretty much armored by the heat, and the electricity doesn't phase him. That'll be a big advantage, because don't forget, Serpentera uses electrical attacks. So when he uses his blast to hit Nuclear Godzilla, it probably won't phase him. Now, I already said about Serpentera's heightened power, so I'm not going to repeat myself. Now for this, it's going to be interesting, because what we have here is pretty much 2 scenarios that could actually happen had Nuclear Godzilla met Serpentera. The first scenario, Serpentera uses his electrical attacks, and of course it doesn't phase him because he's so powerful now that it doesn't bother him. As a result, Nuclear Godzilla uses those pulses that he gives off, and they're so powerful that Serpentera takes some serious hits. It might even melt off a few appendages like some arms and legs, who knows. And after a few blasts, Serpentera gets so much damage that Lord Zed has no choice but to run for it. And Godzilla cools down and he's back to his normal self. That's the first scenario. Now the second one I think would be the most interesting. What I think would happen here, Serpentera tries to zap him with his electric attacks, but again it does no good, and Godzilla is closer and closer, and so Serpentera tries to grab him. And when he does, the heat from Nuclear Godzilla is so hot that his arm melts off. He tries to go for another claw attack. His other arm melts off. Godzilla's getting closer, and the heat is causing Serpentera to melt. He loses his foot. He loses his other foot. His tail is melting. His upper body's melting, and eventually we get a big puddle of molten metal. That's the way I see it happening, because let's not forget, Nuclear Godzilla was so hot that everything around him was melting. And when Serpentera is melted, Godzilla cools down, and, well, there you go. He's back to normal. And he literally defeated Serpentera without even laying a hand on him. Now, those are the scenarios I think would happen if Nuclear Godzilla fought Serpentera. Now, I could compare as to which would be a better scenario, but let's get real. There's no point to it. Obviously, with the Heisei version, Godzilla dies in the end no matter what. Even if we came up with another alternative to how the battle would go, that Godzilla would die. Whereas for nuclear Godzilla, he would lose his power, but he would still be alive. So what do you guys think of all this? Do you think Burning Godzilla would have a better edge over nuclear Godzilla? Maybe the other way around? Maybe you think Serpentera might actually win? And better yet, if there was ever a chance of this coming up, would you want to see it? Feel free to let me know. This is Movie Fan, signing off.